Hello and welcome to the 2022 Coffee Shop. So I'll start with a question. When was the last time you sat down with the sole purpose of writing for a few hours? For all the presenters here today, the answer is every day throughout the entire month of January. We all signed up for the Writer's Workout Interim class, which consists of daily writing challenges and prompts with the goal of writing for 3 hours every day. Now you'll get to see the end product of all our hard work in this presentation featuring our best selections. We're so excited to share with you all what we've been working on, so let's jump right in.
The buzzing is heard from inside the house. The beekeeper has water boiling on the stove and is sipping his coffee on the couch. His large green eyes skim the birdwatching book through his glasses. He's balding but has a thick beard. Looks up and notices that the water has begun boiling, so he walks over and pours sugar into it. The bees love sugar water. He stirs it with calloused hands and sighs. The buzzing grows louder. He hears it in his ears and feels it pulsing on his skin. He needs to go outside soon. The sugar completes dissolving, and he turns off the stove. The water starts cooling. He goes back to the couch and opens up his book again. In his head, he imagines beautiful bird songs and chippers. He only hears the bees. When he first got the hive, they were what he expected. They kept to themselves and only required minor maintenance. The usual cleaning, checking for mites, and extracting honey in the warmer months. But this hive was greedy. Generous beekeepers can supplement their hives with sugar water during colder months in lieu of the honey they may have extracted in the seasons beforehand. The beekeeper was a very generous man. He brought out sugar water in a mason jar. It had a plastic attachment screwed on top, which would distribute the water out to the bees. It looked like a little pool with stairs going up. This hive slurped up the water much more quickly than any of the others had before. He refilled it the next day, and they were waiting for him in a small swarm at the entrance of the hive. They pulsed with excitement as he added the jar. Soon it became a regular thing. The beekeeper went out every day, and the bees were waiting for him. He completed a regular check of the hive, and their honey production was out of this world. The whole top super was filled with honey, which would have been fairly impressive for the summer, but was even more surprising for the winter. Since they were putting the sugar water to good use, he added a larger jar. The swarm gained more confidence. The man could hear them buzzing more clearly than usual as he turned on the stove. He glanced towards the noise and stopped dead in his tracks. The bees were right outside the window, watching and following his movements. He was hesitant to go outside. The longer he waited, the more agitated they got. He studied them and realized they were trying to lead him to the hive so that he could give them the sugar water. He got the jar ready and slowly opened and walked towards the door. The bees had followed him there and gave him space to open it. One weekend, he went to visit his daughter. When he got back, 2 of his chickens were dead and placed by the door. There was no blood, scratches, or any other noticeable sign of trauma. It was as if they had suffocated. The next morning, when he would normally feed the bees, they were in a larger clump by the door, and not only did he hear the usual buzz, but there were a few muffled squawks in the mix. He rushed towards the window, and the bees had grabbed a chicken, were holding it up to the door, and slowly suffocating it. He rushed to grab the water and then immediately placed the chicken back on the ground. He crosses his fingers and quickly puts the jar together. The buzzing is deafening. He can only almost make out the howl of a dog. With speed, he carefully goes outside and gives the bees what they want. There's a drop, and the muffled howls turn into clearer whimpers. He goes inside and doesn't think about how they're getting stronger. He doesn't think about their growth and intelligence. He doesn't think about how they could grab him or his grandson. He sits on the couch, opens his birdwatching book, adjusts his glasses, takes a deep breath, and imagines birdsong.
As each unique flake falls down from the night sky, the young girl is consumed by some kind of high. She flourishes in the snowfall as if it was her home, while she continues to roam. As each flake gracefully lands on her fragile face, she is flooded with utter grace. She dreads the day that the sun soon arises, because there she will lie flooded with cries. In comes the summer and out goes the winter, and the joy that once consumed her is no longer within her. And then this is my second one. Something that cannot be untangled no matter the force. The connection that was obtained could not be divorced. A connection that cannot be pressured but created. They are related. Brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers, the knot could not be bothered. The harder one tugs, the tighter the bond becomes. Where does this connection come from? It is sprouted from pure love, generosity, and sacrifice. Roll the dice. Nothing can break the strength of the Celtic knot, not even shots.
University for some people can be quite lonely. I get lonely sometimes, I'm sure everyone does, we just don't talk about it. We have all made great changes in our lives, such as attending university, and so we are all in the same boat. It is extremely difficult coming from a place which is so familiar to a place which seems so new and strange. The difficulty continues when we try and make new friends. In my experience, I attended an all-girls boarding school my whole life. Within the first term at school, I made friends effortlessly and built amazing friendships across the 7 years at my school. When the time came and we all went our separate ways, it was hard. I didn't want to leave my friends who knew everything about me. I did not want to start again. You can go anywhere in the world and people will tell you, making friends is easy, but it really isn't. In some ways, it's like dating again. You have the same conversations repeatedly. You introduce yourself, where you live, hang out with this person maybe once, maybe twice, and you think this could be your new friend. But then you drift apart, start meeting new people, and have the same conversations again and again. It's an ongoing cycle. I have found this even in my second semester at college. What people don't talk about is feeling lonely. Although we all have our roommates, we all have our close friends, sometimes you can feel lonely. The craving for being in your own house with your familiar furniture and your comforting families is something that will play on the back of my mind continuously. However much you want this back, and however much you want to be back in your bubble, starting again can be an amazing thing, an amazing opportunity. Once you're thrown into this brand new, unfamiliar place, you are allowing yourself to meet people from all over the world with different stories and different backgrounds. This can be extremely educational, and gradually you build a new perspective on people around you. Obviously, I feel lonely sometimes, but this is not all the time. I was very lucky to have met people I felt were interested in me and interested in my stories and my life, and I felt the same. So I felt comfortable. However, loneliness isn't always about being physically alone. You can feel mentally alone too. I am grateful I'm so far away from home, as I'm not encouraged to go home and see my mum and my dad every weekend. I am encouraged to remain at university, continue to make more friends, and throw myself at opportunities. However, I do miss the feeling of my own house, where I belong and where I feel safety and comfort. I miss the road I live on and the route around my town where my mum and I used to run. I miss the coffee shops, the houses, the twinkle lights the town put around the trees during Christmas, and obviously my friends and family. However, we should all move on in our lives and make changes which we might not feel comfortable with. This is all a part of growth and finding your inner strength, which you might not be aware you have. I'm not saying that we will make changes which will dramatically change yourself within. I'm saying that with change comes growth. You will discover new skills, such as problem-solving skills, interpersonal skills, communicating skills, and so many more. Each change we make in our lives help in the discovery of a new skill, which will be important as you grow. I encourage everyone to throw yourself at these amazing opportunities, like university, or moving school, or getting a new job, or even moving abroad. To take this challenge and embrace it. You may feel lonely at times, but this is part of the process of change, and it is totally okay.
Coffee stain on the chartreuse tablecloth, dishes in the sink from that night, an unfinished card game laid out on the dining room table. Cigarettes on the chair of the screened-in porch. Nothing has moved. She spilled her coffee when we were laughing together over breakfast. She put our dishes in the sink afterward. We played a couple hands of gin rummy. We were in the middle of a game when the timer went off. She made her special potatoes in the red pan. It is still sitting on the stove, and I am sitting at the kitchen table staring at it. But now I am alone. She is gone, and I can't bring myself to move anything. I am waiting for her to pick out a new tablecloth, for her to wash the dishes while I dry them, for her to beat me in yet another round of gin rummy, for her to cook me her special potatoes and steak for dinner. I'm even waiting for her to take her after-dinner smoke break. I'll stay waiting. The house still smells like her, the kind of smell that screams nostalgia, but her laughter isn't ringing through the house, and the sound of her voice is fading from my memory. She is gone, and I am sitting here, thinking, remembering, hoping she will return, though I know she won't.
So this is looking back. Those who fail to learn history are doomed to repeat it. Winston Churchill, 1948. I have known of this quote for a long time and has driven me to study history. However, I had often believed a different man had been quoted saying this line. It's actually a requote of an earlier aphorism from a Spanish philosopher. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana, 1905. However, these two aphorisms are very often misquoted and given credit to an Irish statesman from the late 18th century when referring to his aphorism. People will not look forward to posterity, who never look backwards towards their ancestors. Edmund Burke, 1790. Hopefully you can see the irony that many people, including historians and myself, misquote Burke because they don't know their history. Thinking about it more after seeing the wrong quote given to Burke on numerous occasions, I dug a little deeper to find his original quote. The language didn't add up to that of an Irish statesman in Parliament from the 18th century, and by knowing this, I was able to uncover the original quote. The ramifications of misquoting someone from history in a way that you still portray their message but in modern language from a different historical figure is nominal at worst. To a true historian of English Parliament, you would appear ignorant, and to the average everyday person, you would appear backwards, looking as you would be looking into the past instead of the future. That is where I would like to begin in discussing the true ramifications of not knowing the basics of human history, especially that of the last 100 years. History does not repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. Mark Twain. I want to incorporate this quote into this discussion. However, following some research, I discovered something interesting. This quote doesn't exist. Its origins come from two sources. Mark Twain did use the quote, "History never repeats itself," in the 1874 novel, The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. But there's no evidence he ever used the second half of this famous quote. The earliest known use of this quote was from the 70s when referring to Twain's work, meaning there is no evidence he used this in his lifetime. Following the quote's introduction, many authors, when writing about Twain, quoted this as if it had been his most famous quote, when in reality the evidence directs us to believe that he never said this. It's very ironic and contradictory to the actual quote from Mark Twain, as we can see that people have been making the same mistake since the 70s. Let's apply Churchill's quote to something more interesting. World War II sparked a mission of America as it was the first global superpower. Facing the growing threat of communist influence around the world, America sought to influence the world through democracy and peacekeeping. Yet it appears that we've never done such a thing. Was bombing Vietnam flat really about bringing the peace of democracy to overturn the evil that was communism? If you're watching a documentary of a Vietnam veteran actually discussing what went on, the Americans were the invaders and the instigators, while our soldiers were simply there to survive and get back home. This is why many turn to drugs in the field and why we see our first massive anti-war protests through the streets of D.C. America was forced to end the conflict because there wasn't any way to win. The U.S. was the NVA's most effective recruitment tool. After a platoon would raise a village, its inhabitants would have nowhere to go but the NVA. Funnily enough, it appears U.S. politicians never studied their history, as we have done this over and over and over again. In Iran, the CIA and MI6 overthrew the Shah and replaced its government with a more capitalist-friendly regime, one that would allow privatization of oil companies. Private oil companies were split between the U.S. and Great Britain, meaning that Iran was losing massive amounts of GDP. The democracy was overthrown, and so began a 6-year back-and-forth struggle for influence over the country. It's safe to say we didn't succeed. There is also Nicaragua, Afghanistan, Iraq, Cuba, and now most importantly, Ukraine. Ukraine is the next great American failure of global influence and peacekeeping. While the majority of Ukrainians support NATO, the majority of Russian soldiers standing on or within the border don't know this. Their news has been nationalized to the point of pure propaganda. The only thing they do know is that the U.S., along with our allies, actively influenced the 2013 election in order to put into power a pro-Western president. Ukraine has struggled with corruption since their independence following the collapse of the USSR. In 2008, they were denied entry into NATO for this reason and turned to Russia to join their sphere of influence. Disliking the effects of their own decision, the U.S. led efforts to overthrow the pro-Russian president. After mass rioting between pro-Russian and pro-NATO activists, the president was forced to flee and called for Putin's support. We know this as a Crimea annexation. I'm telling you this because America isn't the only country running itself into the ground by not acknowledging its past mistakes. Putin seems to forget that the Soviet Union's failed incursions, seems to forget about the Soviet Union's failed incursions. So I'll leave y'all with this. Look back for guidance into the future.
The world was in chaos, as disasters occurred in every country worldwide. Every hero was rushing around to help everyone that they could, but they did not notice a large building rising in New York City because they were so busy. An outsider could only describe it as a large fortress surrounded by thick walls with a single entry point. Inside was the now infamous League of Villains. They were rushing around to complete the task that their leader, Nightfall, gave them. They had no idea what he was planning until his second command, Pyro, found his plans left in the open while searching for Nightfall. Nightfall! What the hell is this? Every member of the League stopped what they were doing when they heard one of their leaders yelling out in great fury. What are you talking about, Pyro? I didn't intend to find this, but now I have to know. Do you plan to throw all of us away to achieve your dream? Everyone turned to look at their leader as he remained silent. And as silence, Pyro continued. These plans detail how you intend to make a final stand, causing the destruction of the League, but making heroes improve. Who in the hell are you to use us like this? Pyro, I do not plan on using you. I knew that one day this would come, so now I have to ask all of you a question. Do you wish to live in a world that you desire? This question made everyone silent. You said you would destroy all of us. The League is only an idea. Every single one of you is an individual. Nightfall stood up. I am too broken to live in the world that we all want to create. Heroes all around the globe are mobilizing, and I don't want to risk any of you for my dream. I was a powerless and penniless boy in a world full of the extraordinary. Look what it did to me. Tears began to run down the man's face. You have all done everything I could have asked for, and you have done it with no complaint. We have caused chaos everywhere you look, but if we want to create the world we want, we have to remind them of what they fight for. I'll draw all of their anger and hate towards me. I want all of you to flee before that happens. You plan to lose? I never plan to win. The truth of the matter is that even if we take over a country, how would the world respond? The only way for us to create a change is to show them what true evil is. However, I will not force any of you to fall beside me. That is why I'm giving you a chance to leave. Do you truly plan to sacrifice yourself for the world? One of the female villains asked their leader. There's no other way. Besides, I'm a broken man that has long outstayed his welcome in the world. As everyone looked at him, Nightfall said, Vortex will take all of you anywhere you wish to go. I thank all of you for standing by me, not as underlings, but as friends. After he said that, portals began to appear as the villains disappeared to wherever they wished. In the end, only Nightfall and Pyro remained in the room. They will hate you, Pyro said to his old boss. I know, but the need to unite against a larger threat. I will not target any of you, so please, don't fight. Pyro nodded as a portal appeared behind him. He turned to enter it, but stopped when Nightfall said one last thing. You know, Pyro, you are like a brother to me, so please live on for the both of us. Pyro nodded once again and entered the portal, leaving Nightfall by himself. He returned to his chair and looked out at the empty room as he waited for his end to come. The only thing in his eyes was resignation at the fate laid out before him.
As Lucien stood on the bridge of the Zephyr, he examined the vial in his hand, knowing exactly what he would have to do. That archmage from years ago used the same thing to help Valonia confront the Herald of the Abyss, so it was their best shot at dealing with it now. Lucien looked up just in time to see the Herald's dragon approaching on the horizon. He quickly inserted the vial into the hollow grip of his knife and placed it in its scabbard, before drawing his longsword. The dragon's arrival was met with a barrage of arrows and magic in a desperate attempt to take it down before it sank the ship, but the dragon's small figure and speed made it virtually impossible to hit. Its first dive at the ship managed to take down the front mast and take splinters out of the central one. The crew scrambled in a feeble attempt to patch up any major damage as the dragon loosed a bolt of necrotic energy at Lucien, but a well-calculated slash from his sword amplified by his magic deflected it harmlessly away from the ship. Once again, any members of the crew that were capable fired a volley of ice, fire, lightning, and steel at it, but it slipped through the veritable wall of projectiles without a scratch as it made another dive at the ship, this time finishing off the central mast. With no sails, the ship was at the mercy of the currents beneath it. Finally, the dragon landed aboard the flat, open main deck of the ship. As it charged up its bellows once again, Lucien slipped under it and struck at its throat. As the dragon reeled, it coughed up the energy blast and spit it at him, but he was ready with the shield to absorb the blow. Before the dust settled, Lucian charged forward, ready to throw all of his strength into a strike from his sword that would certainly end the beast, but he was stopped by a bolt of black lightning that blinded him as it struck. As he opened his eyes, he was no longer on the Zephyr, but rather found himself standing on a floor that looked like broken glass as a pitch-black void extended around him in every direction. A voice called out from the darkness, "Do you think you can escape?" Lucian looked up to see a figure that looked like Valonia, but her amethyst eyes had turned ruby red, and a pair of spectral skeletal wings levitated immediately behind her. This was the form of the Herald of the Abyss, a mockery of the most compassionate, courageous person Lucian knew. "Quite the opposite. I was actually wondering if you were even going to show up," he responded, as suddenly a surge of electricity ran through his body as he was paralyzed, then dragged into the air by an unseen force. "Struggle all you want, worm," the Herald spoke, before throwing Lucian back down onto the ground. Before he had a chance to stand up, 4 swords made of solidified darkness manifested in the air around him, shooting into him and pinning him to the ground. "Pathetic," the Herald remarked as it landed in front of Lucian, before turning to walk away. The sound of drawing steel and flourishing magic resonated through the air at a deafening volume as the Herald turned around just in time to narrowly avoid a lance made of silver light that flew directly over her shoulder, through the space her head had just been. As she examined Lucian's figure, she saw his arm outstretched and could hear him struggling to breathe before he raised his head up and spoke. "Are you done yet? Is it my turn?" Bright light shone through the wounds that covered his body as he shook himself off and cast aside the swords that held him down before holding up his own. The Herald laughed at what she believed to be a pitiful attempt to intimidate her before she spoke again. "Perish," as an uncountable number of swords manifested in the air around him. As they darted forward, threatening to tear him apart, his mind was filled with images and memories. He recalled the first day he wielded a sword in defense of others. His village had been attacked by the spawn of the Abyss, and the guards sent by the king were outnumbered, but somehow this one child was enough to turn the tides of the fight and hold the line against the Abyss. He then recalled the day he received a summons to Silverkeep, where he was first given his mission to eliminate the aspect of nothing, and was introduced to the other members of his group. He remembered every decisive victory they had won, every moment they shared, and finally remembered one moment that changed his life forever. The night Valonia found him on the terrace reminded him that the weight of the world was not his own to carry, and reminded him of what it felt like to live fully alive, flying freely as a bird. When he snapped back to reality, he poured his soul into his sword and swung in a wild round slash, knocking down the swords around him. He spoke again, this time addressing Valonia directly. "Valonia, when you wake up, everything will have changed. The world will not be the same beautiful place you remember. Life as you know it will be entirely replaced by something different, but don't ever give up hope," Lucian said, as ribbons of silver light flowed around him and around his sword, stitching his wounds back together and repairing his armor. The Herald, now truly fearful, manifested a lance from the darkness. "Vile human insect," she shouted before hurling the lance at him. As it met his sword, the lance shattered into fractals that scattered in the air as an explosion of arcane energy knocked the Herald off balance. Lucian charged through the cloud of crystalline shards, paying no regard to them as they dug into his skin. With his sword at the ready, before leaping into the air with the tip of his sword pointed directly at the Herald, she manifested a shield of solid shadow above herself in an attempt to stop him, but as Lucian's sword struck its surface, he pulled together all of his willpower and made it manifest as a final burst of energy, forming a pair of radiant wings behind him that propelled him forward, shattering the barrier. He called out as he descended like a meteor, "Valonia, be brave. Push on. You can still end this story the way you want." As his sword met its target, a tremor surged through the ground, sending debris splintering around the two of them, as Lucian spoke one last time. "Live, Valonia, and fly for both of us." As the dust settled, the Herald opened her eyes. She saw the figure of Lucian hunched over her, and saw his sword buried in the ground directly behind her. Lucian released the grip on his sword as the light faded from his eyes and he began to collapse. As he fell, the Herald unleashed a burst of energy that knocked his body back. She looked up at him and saw a faint trace of a smile on his lifeless face before he was struck with an immense pain in her lower spine. She reached around and pulled a bloody knife from her back and investigated it. She noticed a small hole in the tip of it and a trigger mechanism on the handle that, when pressed, released an empty vial through the pommel. She felt a burning sensation beginning at the wound, slowly spreading through her body, down her arms and legs, then finally into her head as her vision blurred. The Herald screamed out in agony as her wings began twitching and her dark aura lashed out in every direction. Finally, she collapsed onto the floor as the black void around her faded away and the shattered glass floor beneath her disappeared. When the herald opened her eyes again and examined herself and her surroundings, she found herself on the main deck of the Zephyr. As the crew began asking her questions and helping her up, she realized that she no longer had control over the body she was in, and the voice coming out of her mouth was Valonia's. She looked around for the nearest reflective surface, and when she looked at her own reflection, her eyes had turned amethyst purple and her phantasmal wings were gone. She heard Valonia's voice ask where Lucien's was, and as she watched the crew exchange nervous glances, she felt her body beginning to cry as Lucien's last words echoed through her mind. Live, Valonia, and fly for both of us.
The last time we saw each other was just for a moment. I bumped into you in line outside of the restaurant when I was visiting my sister. I wish we'd had more time to see each other outside of that, but you know how it is. College has taken over our lives. I miss how we got to spend so much time together being devious, especially all the times we were together that summer 2 years ago. That was a special summer. We got into all sorts of trouble. Even though we haven't gotten to see one another in months, I know you will always remain one of my best friends, literally since day one. You could probably say that we were forced to be best friends since our moms were too, but I wouldn't wish to be forced in a great relationship with anyone else. Do you remember when we were in middle school and Amelia and I would come over to spend the night with you and Killian? We would lock ourselves in the playroom at your house and perform dance routines for one another. There's no doubt that you were always the one who won, rewarded by score and by most laughter, and I was for sure the one who always lost. I've always admired how unapologetically authentic you were and are. You would burst into the playroom in the most ridiculous outfits, singing and dancing with all of your energy to an absurd song. Now that's something I'll always remember. I feel like most childhood friends don't last into adulthood, but you've always been by my side, even when it seems like we're living in two different worlds. As we got older, we continued to get into trouble with one another. I have you to thank for coming out of my shell and learning to be bold and daring. On that note, I think it was you who I had my first sip of alcohol with. You, Amelia, Killian, and I snuck out of your house at midnight one summer weekend. We all went to the neighborhood pool for a midnight dip with a bag of some beer that we took out of your parents' fridge in the garage. Out of the four of us, I'd never had alcohol before. I was always the most timid one out of us, being a goody two-shoes and always pleasing the parents, so this was a big deal. Of course, no one pressured me into anything. I just wanted to be like you guys, totally laid back, daring, and living in the moment. However, I think I maybe just had one sip and pretended to drink the rest of it. I was happy enough to be in the company of my sister and our best friends. You guys always cracked me up. And remember 2 summers ago? I'm not sure how our schedules finally lined up so well, where we saw each other almost every day. I think we were both anxious about going to college and being away from home. I know for me, having you in my presence, spending time before we parted for a new chapter was truly comforting. We had so many adventures that summer. Remember how we told our parents we were going out to hang out with a friend, but it was really some random party? I totally dragged you there wanting to see this one guy, and the party was horrible. I felt so stupid for making us go there, but you made it so much fun despite us not knowing a soul. Later that night, I remember laying in bed with you and talking about the most random things, silly conversations turning into really vulnerable ones. Every moment with you were and always are so genuine and meaningful to me. I miss you tons. I wish we could go back to having less busy lives where we can fill our time having adventurous, sleepless nights. Although I know our current busy days are worth it for the years ahead of us, don't you miss being crazy and wild together? I cannot thank you enough for sticking my life. I know you'll be around forever, and I have a feeling our paths will collide in the future, and we'll be spending plenty of time together. Who knows, maybe one day our kiddos will be sneaking out of the house getting into trouble of their own. Can you imagine?
Just being is not as easy as it sounds. Others worry themselves over what you are, and especially over what you're not. Siendo puede ser lo mejor o lo peor, y lo malo es que muchas veces no está en tu control. Y lo bueno es que puedes reaccionar como te da la gana. Simple siendo te da millones de posibilidades. Through being, you'll see the most beautiful things. Simple siendo puede quebrar tu corazón. Lo importante es que sigas siendo. Being isn't hard, all you have to do is breathe. Being yourself is a challenge. Siendo lo que eres tiene inmenso valor. Siendo lo que eres es lo superior.
Alone at the End of the Universe. This title's a bit silly, really, as no part of it's actually true. Am I alone? Not really. I'm in a room full of people drinking large amounts of tea, though if those count as being alone, I guess that's up for debate. Is this the end of the universe? It's also unlikely, as the moon slamming into whales is very unlikely to actually end everything that ever existed. I told it this way because my history professor once told me that the only good way to get people to make you want to actually read something was to make it interesting, and a little lie like that never hurt anybody. The world is going to end in 15 minutes. There's a delightful lot that a person can do in 15 minutes, so I suppose it really isn't that bad. Many great debates have taken place in that amount of time. I've learned how to assemble a rudimentary toy with a pencil and a bit of plastic, and half of that, and the 20-somethings in the room with me decided that 15 minutes was exactly enough time to make a pot of tea, sit down, and argue about whether or not the world was going to actually end. Humans are delightfully good at that, arguing. Tell a dog or something like that, the world's going to end in 15 minutes, they'll hardly even know what you said. Tell a human, they'll sit down and have a fight with you about it. Yeah, I always preferred dogs that way, if I'm being honest. The world's going to end in 15 minutes because the moon is going to slam into the planet, and anyone standing outside might clearly see there's significantly more moon there than there usually is, which might tip them off that something's happening. Why the moon is closer than it used to be is at both times the least important and most asked question that anyone has thought up since it started getting closer 15 minutes ago. I suppose in the first 5 of those minutes, whether the moon was actually getting closer at all was the biggest subject of contention. I heard my fair share of people say that indeed it had always looked that big all right. Subject I eventually shifted to how the moon started doing it, how long it was going to do it, and why it was doing it, never how to actually stop it, because that wasn't the important bit. The Colemans were thoroughly convinced that the moon was getting closer because Miss Patricia hadn't been watering her flowers for quite some time, creating a dreadfully magnetic display of weeds and turnips. Miss Patricia was thoroughly convinced the moon was getting closer because the Colemans had been watering their flowers too often, creating a pond. Of course, neither of these arguments were correct, though Miss Patricia's arguments for the magnetic effects of too much water on the object the size of the planet were somewhat convincing. I hear tell that another reason people had concluded the moon was quite upset with people was thinking that it was made of cheddar and had it therefore been begun moving towards the Earth to show its inhabitants that it was indeed much closer to Swiss. This one was much more likely manufactured as part of the ongoing cheese debate that had been ravaging the supermarkets. All in all, this was completely meaningless. It only made sense that the last hours of humanity would be spent bickering about cheese and Miss Patricia's flowers, but it really did make it quite difficult to enjoy the majesty of the situation. Sitting in a room surrounded by modern-day intellectuals like this really is something incredible, though. Not only do they have the intellectual power to come up with the most fascinatingly wrong ideas I've ever heard, but they also have the smarts to actually start believing them. Speaking at the podium now is the world-renowned moonmancer. It's a much better title than astrogeologist, whatever that means, Richard Thorne. The world, he began, is indeed not going to end because of the moon hitting the planet. Think of it, the moon is a mere fraction the size of the Earth. If I threw a ball at you, would you die? I, for one, am sure that if I listened to him prattle on any longer, I would most certainly die, but it would be from boredom. It's phenomenal that a person can manage to take a subject as wonderful as the world ending by moon, and yet still somehow manage to make it as dull as one of their other papers. Really, those cotton-brained intellectuals are the best I've ever seen in making the worst things imaginable. Perhaps you're wondering why I've chosen to sit in this worst place imaginable for my last moments, and I doubt I have a good answer for that. If I'm to be given 5 minutes to waste before the end of the world, I suppose there's a little better way to do it than listen to Jimmy Willoughby proclaim the positive effects of jumping in the distance from the moon. If everyone did it, we might actually get away. Out the window now, I can see the buildings around us begin to tear up from the ground, a horrible collapsing and ripping sound that makes. It is quite cathartic listening to all the knobheads in the room fly around me and smack the walls. I do wonder what it'll feel like when it happens to me.
As the sun shone over the valley, it illuminated the fields of barley with a golden hue. The wind blew a whimsical breeze that picked up the remaining fallen autumn leaves, and as the wind carried the leaves away, they seemed to dance to a natural waltz in the sky. The waltz they danced to was in the rhythm of springtime, and the conductor was Mother Nature. The barley in the field, overpowered by the waltz, swayed as the spring breeze blew across the field, and the swaying of the barley created the illusion of an ocean made of gold. It was at this time that a family of deer came out of the woods that encircled this golden clearing, and as the deer stood on the shore of this magnificent sight, they seemed to stare at the immense beauty with a curious contemplation. Soon after, some of the other woodland creatures began to emerge. First came the squirrels, who climbed the surrounding trees and energetically chased after each other, as they tend to do. The second family to emerge were the birds, who soared high above the clearing, able to observe the immensity of the golden ocean beneath them. After surveying the beautiful landscape, the birds flew down to join the other animals at the edge of the field. It was then that the bravest deer, the graceful king of the woodlands, took his first step. Hesitant at first, he placed his mighty hoof into the golden ocean, and as he ventured further into the field, the other deer followed. And as the deer ventured further into the cascading waves of golden barley, the other animals followed them. The birds took their posts on the deer's mighty antlers, and the squirrels with graceful whimsy ran after them. Once they were at the center of the field, the animals became entranced by the waltz that caused the barley to sway around them. And as the rhythm of springtime took over them, they began to dance. The deer jumped and ran with glee. The birds flew and tweeted in blissful joy, and the squirrels eagerly ran about. Alas, as the woodland creatures were being distracted by the beautiful waltz of spring, another family of creatures arrived. The birds were the first to notice, and in seeing the oncoming horde of unknown creatures, they flew away. It was then that the deer noticed, and they stood there frozen, gazing intently as the trees surrounding the field cracked and fell, crashing to the ground in a defeated mess of splinters and sticks. And as more and more timber was reduced, the deers could see the creatures that walked on two legs. These unknown creatures walked alongside creations unknown to the woodland families. The sounds of clanging and clanking grew louder as the horde approached the edge of the golden ocean. The woodland family could hear the creatures roar as they marched forward. The squirrels ran, desperately trying to evade the creatures. And it was at this point that the flashes of light followed by the horrific cracking sounds began. And in the very same moment, the king of the forest fell dead on top of the barley, marking the end of his reign. The other deer ran desperately trying to escape, but sadly they could not outrun these powerful creatures. And as the two-legged creatures entered the golden ocean, now beginning to be tainted red, they crowded around the fallen deer and threw them into the back of their unknown creations. The earth trembled as the army marched, destroying the field's beauty. The tanks and heavy trucks left tracks in the barley, and the squirrels that were not fast enough were buried deep into the earth beneath the field. And as the soldiers made it to the end of the now destroyed clearing, they rejoiced about the game they would enjoy later that night. However, like sweet justice for Mother Nature, this happened to be the moment the first bomb fell, killing all of those who had desecrated the beautiful ocean of golden barley along with its woodland families. For the creatures that survived the massacre in the field, of which there were few, their life would be one of torment, as the green woodlands of Europe in which they lived would be tainted red by a battle fought amongst the unknown creatures that came to the field that day. Tainted red by those that fought for what they believed in. Tainted red by those that fought for their families. Tainted red by those that were forced to fight for their lives. Tainted red by yet another world war.
My feet are light, floating, yet I am still stumbling. I throw open the door to a dank room, a film of beer clinging to the floor. I fall to my knees and scramble to kiss the feet of the porcelain queen. The bowl in front of me holds horrors unseen. Sensing the end, I yank the handle. As it rotates round, eventually sinking down, through the haze I hear laughter. I turn and hear the blinding light calling my name. Everything is gone. I awake to a splitting head, a dry mouth, and a Sahara throat. My fingers wander until I find my phone. I look through my messages, and to my horror it would seem Harrison took a fucked up picture of me. This one is called Golf. Hard hammering, I tighten my fingers around the grip. I can feel the adrenaline forcing my muscles to twitch. I swing back and through, but I feel my foot slip. I scream at myself, "You son of a..." The rage fades, the ball kisses the green. The miss wasn't nearly as bad as it seemed. It takes a hop, then goes for a stroll, losing its pace 10 feet from the hole. The fairway's a red carpet as I move towards the green. I feel like Tiger, Johnson, and Jack, the absolute best, it would seem. As I examine the line and prepare to putt, I know I'm going to make it. I feel it in my gut. I take the putter back, a birdie at stake. My vision turns red when the ball begins to break. It skates right past, flirting with the cup. I take a deep breath to calm myself and look straight up. Was it God or humans who created such a brutal game? I suppose I'll find out tomorrow when I do it all again.
He had reached the end. There was, well, not even nothing, somehow less than, something beyond the void. Nothing, by definition, was the absence of something. However, wherever he had gone, it was so barren, so raw, so primordial, that there was an absence of nothing itself, and an absence of something, as paradoxical as it was, especially light. Not in the sense that the location he had come to was dark. Dark wasn't really an adjective that applied to his current situation. There were no adjectives that applied to his current situation. No, not the absence of illumination, but the absence of elementary photons themselves. He had surpassed light, surpassed particles, surpassed colors. What he saw, if he really saw any tangible thing, and this wasn't just the feverish imaginings of the dying mind of an Icarus flown too close to the sun, was beyond understanding itself. He had longed for some answers for the final human question, the meaning behind it all, for so long. Answers to the questions of life after death, the Creator, whether there was a God or was nothing. But those questions all seem so trivial now. Beings, ethereal constructs of light, even the vast nothingness and the void of space were far behind him. He was faster than light, encased in his pill-sized spacecraft with its antimatter coating. He had flown past everything and nothing in a matter of slivers of seconds so small they were yet to be named by humans. He had pulled back the wizard's curtain on the final answer, on God, on nothing, on everything, on the meaning of it all. He had torn down the fabric of reality, whatever that was, like a layer of wallpaper, and peeked behind it. What he views now is unable to be described in any fashion, words or otherwise. It is what lies beyond trivial notions of meaning or a place in the universe. There is no light, no color, no sound, not even the black of an empty void. He has peeled back the void and now looks upon what operates behind it. And he asks this question, "Why?" he shouts. "What does it all mean?" And in return, there is beyond nothing, an answer that indicates an insignificance beyond meaninglessness. He does not even hear his own words echoed to himself so that he might twist it into his own satisfying answer to the question. He receives his answer, and it is final. This is final. This is the beginning. This is the end.
You think I don't know that? The man was talking on his phone. I guess it would be fair to say it was more like he was yelling. Well, he was yelling. In such a small, condensed place, you'd think it'd be hardly necessary to be so loud, but this guy clearly didn't think so. I tried turning away from him, but the seats on subway trains don't really allow for that. I guess I could have given up my seat, just stood somewhere farther off, but I was tired, naturally so, and I'm not a martyr. Ignoring him would be easier, though I am much better at standing than I am ignoring people. Patience is a virtue, not a requirement. Is it really bettering myself if I don't feel better for it? Oh well, none of that matters. It's such a long day. After such a long day, the little patience I might have had was worn sorely thin. Look, just drop it all. Yeah, drop it all, he continued, lambasting whoever was on the other side of the line. I'm something of a good person, so I thought perhaps to spare the recipient by shoving the phone up this guy's ass. However, I'm not much for causing a scene, as all people aren't. I bit my tongue in hopes the call would end soon. The call did not soon end. In fact, I would have bet actual tangible money that he had noticed my growing anger and was prolonging the experience to spite me. In that moment of fury and pure masculinity, I stood, grabbed the phone from his hand, and threw it to the ground with the strength of 100 men. Then, looking down on him, I watched as he apologized and began to cry uncontrollably. It was great and liberating, except none of that really happened, and I just continued sitting there stewing. It's funny, I'm not naturally a creative person, but some people just bring out the best in you. Leaning back in the sorry plastic chair, I closed my eyes in an attempt to block it all out. At that point, it wasn't so much about solely that one aggressor, but the entire day I was trying so hard to stow away. For some people, sitting back with your eyes closed leads to perfect solitude. Were it so easy, I could have gotten there too. Maybe that'd solve a whole host of my problems. Unfortunately, attempting to find that solitude delivers me farther from it. I could do nothing more than focus even heavier on the world I'm trying to escape. I bring this up because usually that would be the case. However, here it was not. Soon after borrowing back into myself, I found perfect silence. I opened my eyes to an empty subway car. Shifting forward, I peered around. No one was in any of the cars. What the hell? I stood, firmly on edge. Did I fall asleep? No, you didn't. The voice was smooth. There was a man sitting in one of the chairs to my right. He was dressed in a full suit, held a cane, and had a top hat on his head. Did I say that out loud? I kept looking him over. He looked familiar, but at the same time I had no real way to place him. Anthony Cross, he stood. I'd like to offer you a proposition if you're willing. What? The world is full of all sorts of people, Mr. Cross. I want to give you something none of them have, and none of them could ever dream of having. I'll ask nothing of you more than to ask me nothing else. Wait a second, he lifted his hand. I'm sure you have questions, Mr. Cross. It's only natural, but I won't answer any of them, so please spare me the time. I'm rather busy as of late. After a moment of silence, he let his hand drop to his side again. A choice, Mr. Cross. No one will bother you any more. I'm sure you'll enjoy that. It's my gift to you, the only one I'll give. I just need your blessing. This is all very vague. I don't even know you. Are you sure? My eyes fell away from him. Everything he was saying was obviously some kind of con. No one would trust these sorts of promises. They're little better than flat-out lies. Yet I couldn't help but feel their truth. I couldn't help but want to be at least a little more peaceful, a little left alone. I'll accept your choice, I said, with little to no confidence. Fantastic, I was sure you'd say yes. He turned to face me more fully. I can give you only one, but it will be absolute. I can offer total respect, total power, or total control. He put both hands on his cane, steadying himself. Respect over everyone, power over everything, and control over life. His eyes locked mine. Choose only one. The choice still stank of vagueness, each sounding impossibly more ludicrous than the last. At the end of the day, however, the choice was easy. I had no need for respect, and I couldn't care less about power. However, I longed entirely for control. I think I'll pick the third. Control, I see. You're certainly a simple man, Mr. Cross, though I didn't expect you to surprise me, he said, extending his arm. Then the deed is done. We only need to shake on it now. He continued staring at me as I slowly reached for his outstretched hand. Everything about what was happening was strange, and I still don't know why I was so calm, so all right, so accepting of everything that was happening. It was impossible, so perhaps at times of perfect impossibility, the mind acts with perfect, most basic clarity. I shook his hand and in that moment sealed a rather consequential deal. Yet I was excited, anxious, nervous, and many other things I shouldn't have been. How will I know if it works? I asked, stepping away from him. Questions, Mr. Cross, so full of questions. I can hear them all. He turned away from me. It looked as if he was in pain. To answer this one, it already has. The subway came to a stop. I looked out at the people on the platform as the doors opened. Turning back to where the man had been, I found he was gone. The people out on the platform looked curious. Some got on, but others were overcome with concern. I was the only one on the train.
For a long time, I was happy, content with life and all it brought. My biggest joy was watching the rainbow settle across the sky after a storm. There were people by my side, people whom I could trust, and then you appeared. You were the darkness that covered the sky during Judgment Day, 'cause you are the darkness that consumed me. You are the one my mother warned me about. Like a never-ending nightmare forever. Yeah, you are. On top of the crumbling building, the red sky becomes the roof. I lie still, afraid of moving, breathing, living. This throbbing pain I felt for the first time was worse than anything one could imagine. When I turn my head at your smile, unknowing I reach out to you. 'Cause you are the darkness that covered me. You are like a blanket of hope. Albeit dangerous, it was comforting. Like a never-ending dream forever. Yeah, you are. With the rainbow now gone and rain beginning to shine, I think of all the things you've done, said, to make me feel this way. I want to run, scream, cry, but I also want to laugh, never change a thing. You are my nightmare because you are what I shouldn't want, but you are my dream because you are what I couldn't have. A dream come true or a nightmare gone unnoticed. Not sure which one, but yeah, you are.
The clashing of weapons could be heard ringing across the battlefield. Bodies ran to and fro, constantly engaging the enemies. Bodies dropped, the front line pushed. Meanwhile, the supply line moved behind them, carrying precious nourishment back home. They just had to hold the line. One of them deftly wove through the battlefield, interrupting the battles to give their side an advantage. Another died. The sun beat down, cooking the bodies of the dead. The surroundings filled with fog as work was constantly done, and the bodies released a massive amount of heat. Soon, the supply line would be done carrying the goods. Soon they could retreat. However, that moment was taking eternities to come. In one place in the massive line, the enemy broke through and interrupted the precious supply line behind them. It was a massacre. However, the army was resilient in their duty and pushed the breach back, reforming the line. The enemies stuck in the back were swiftly dealt with, and the supply line continued. That interruption would cost hundreds of more soldiers. Bodies continued to fall, and the line continued to push. The two armies clashed on top of the trampled dead, their feet squelching into the guts of the fallen, giving a horrendous stench that permeated everything. Soon, the end of the supply line reached their home, and the army fell back to defend. They surrounded the entrance, defending from the attacks of the enemy. With the supply line returned, they could concentrate their defense. However, it didn't matter. They lost too many. The enemy broke through, rushing through the passages and massacring the young and non-combatants. The army stuck outside, fought for their lives, but it didn't matter. The enemy re-emerged victorious. With food in their grasp and a fallen foe behind them, they returned to their home. A long line formed, marching on victorious. Jimmy watched, crouched. Below him was an ant nest. He watched as the defenders tried to fend off the attackers but failed. They stormed the nest and obtained the food. He couldn't investigate the nest, but in his head he imagined small workers and young larvae scattered across the passages, bisected by the enemy army and left to rot underground. Who knew watching nature like this could be so entertaining, Jimmy thought. Slowly he stood up and continued to explore the forest. When the sun started to set, he returned to his home with thoughts of ants still on his mind.
Upon the sun-tanned planks of wood I lie. The howling breeze swirls through the golden sky. When eyelids closed, with me white clouds flit by, while under, golden ripples flow by. The cards begin to pile up as he rolls down his window and takes a deep breath, overwhelmed by the familiar smell of the pine trees. The blue and white license plates glimmer in the sunlight. The boy thinks he's standing out. Everyone must be staring at the different plate. He feels as though he's crawling along until his dad finally parks the car. The ball of fire descends from the sky. Around it, sweet flames gracefully extend. A family of loons gracefully glide beyond the water with its golden bends. The boy jumps out of the car. 16 hours was too long to be packed in with his father. He's ready to get out. He wants to feel the sweet breeze on the dock, barely out of view from the parking lot. The cabin is messy as mothers try to organize their children's items. The boy and his father are less stressed. They slowly make up their bed and plug in the alarm clock. The boy has less stuff, not knowing how he will return home. The father, a neutral look on his face, scans his son's temporary home. A simple nod, and the boy knows he approves. Behind me, pine trees sway in the sweet breeze. The boats reply against the wooden boards. The children's laughter puts me back to ease. I want to stay until my final chord. The bell rings in the background. It's time for the final lunch. The crowd descends on the worn dining hall. Greasy hamburgers on thin buns are pushed on each plate. The boy devours it, knowing what's to come after lunch. His father slowly takes his time. The boy begins to feel it. The doc is calling his name. He must wait until after lunch. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees a table of people standing up. Parents embrace their children and head out for the parking lot. The boy can now hear the sound of the water floating by the bases of the dock. He's ready. He glances at his watch and then to his father. The dad, noticing the action, takes the final bite of his lunch. He looks over towards his son and stands up. The two of them embrace, and then with a pat on the back, the father walks away. But now the bell has rung for our goodbye. The ball of fire descended from the sky.
Dear Musa, I wanted to write this letter to you because I was thinking of you. I know we usually don't write to each other or check up on each other as often as we want to, but I want you to know that it is not because we don't love each other, but rather the way we grew up. All my friends call their parents, either their mom or dad, to talk to them about their day. They talk to them about how they feel, about who they met, about the difficulties they endured during the day, and take advice from them. But they do that because normally their parents have gone to college and experienced the same difficulties or experiences as their son, and it is easy for them to understand. When I was younger, I was mad at you and Mom. I was mad at you guys because you were not the same as other parents in my class. You did not understand the culture. You were not there when we had fun school plays. You were not there when we were singing in crowds. You were not there when we were celebrating the end of the school year, even though every parent of my friends showed up. I was blaming you and Mom for the longest time for not giving me the support I needed in my childhood. Being a man now and understanding the world better, I understand why you and Mom were the way you were when I was younger. In fact, I respect you guys much more than I ever did with my friends' parents. Many parents change their sons' or daughters' life to some extent. They teach them how this world functions, how to treat and communicate with other people, be there in the tough times to talk about the situation. This is how I always thought a parent should be. The reason some parents are good at this, I believe, is that they went through the same culture, the same situation when they were younger. So it is easy for them to understand their situation and be there for their son or daughter while going through a tough time. They grew up in a safe environment. They knew that food is available the next day. They knew that their family would have the opportunity for an education, so the emotional side played a bigger role for them to be happy. Being more mature and older now, I understand this is not the case with you and Mom. Growing up in Afghanistan does not give you the opportunities as growing up in Norway. It is just as simple as that. In Afghanistan, it is about survival. It is about waking up the next day. It is about having food on the table for yourself and your family. I realize now this was the case with you and Mom. Your whole lives have been a constant fight to make your children's lives better, to give us the opportunity that you guys never had, the opportunity for an education, to have food on table every day, and to waking up every day knowing that you are safe. Moving to Norway when I was 7 years old and being 22 years old now, I do not remember much of my time from Afghanistan as you would expect. But I do have flashbacks. I do have feelings that I remember. These are feelings that are intense. That's why they have rooted themselves in me. What I remember is being scared sometimes, feeling hungry often, and not understanding why my father was not home. Being a grown man now and understanding how the world works, understanding the obstacles you and Mom had to go through for me and my siblings to have the opportunities we do today, I could not be more grateful towards you guys. You went away to another country and worked for years to send money home so we could have food on our tables. Doing that at such a young age, a lot younger than I am today. You called home a few times a month to check up on us. You were lonely. And by the end of it, risking your life when you decided to go to Europe as a refugee so we could have a better and safer future. Even though you had heard so many stories about people dying trying to get there. I do not know as much as I wish about your journey to Norway, because I know you don't like talking about it because of everything you went through to get there. But I know you had to cross oceans even when you could not swim, and when you knew there was only 50% chance of you guys making it to the other side of the sea. I know you've been beaten, running away from police, sleeping in parks, and not having money for food. I feel selfish now for not understanding you and Mom when I was younger, for not understanding it takes time to adapt to a new culture, new place, and new people. for not understanding what you went through is a lot bigger than coming to school plays, to my end of year parties, for not understanding why you were different. I wanted to write this letter to you to let you know that I am grateful for you and Mom. I tried to understand what you and Mom went through to give me and my siblings the life we have now, but I don't think I could ever do that. Thank you for everything, for being different, and I love you. Your son, Mo.
For context, this is a poem from the perspective of a younger narrator. Outside my window, I see the moon waiting for me, calling all space enjoyers. I've never made a space helmet out of a cereal box or a spaceship out of cardboard. I climb up on trees too weak to hold me, branch out my arms to the sky as if I can feel the warmth of stars from the top of my backyard. I make up constellations, trace letters in the sky saying, I'm here, I'm thinking of you, let's go to the moon, and hope you see it. I imagine the moon a lot smaller than it actually is. Something I can hold in my hand, but heavy and whole. I want to keep it to myself, to be selfish for once. I want to be able to look into the mirror and tell myself I'm the girl with the moon in her hands. Go outside to a moonless world, cold and barefoot, and reach to hold the waning crescent between my fingers up to the sky and see the universe finally smiling back. Thank you.
My grandmother's house, nestled in the suburbs of Atlanta, is a place of nostalgia. Built in classic plantation style, more modest than its antebellum predecessors, but still exhibiting the covered front porch, stately columns, and symmetrical windows with shutters, it is a place of fun, of childhood memories as deep and complex as the familiar aroma of hydrangeas and gardenias in their beds of Milorganite. The scent sticks in the back of my throat, made heavy by the humidity. It is a place to soak in the sunshine and a place to hear the rain on the roof. However, my best memories occurred as the air released the heat of the day, giving way to a warm black night that hugged me tightly within its safe arms. The whippoorwills provided a familiar lullaby, a sound exclusive to a southern evening, backed by the frogs and katydids. My grandmother, affectionately called Jeannie, had snuck me and my sister outside with our hair still wet and fingers still pruny from our before-bed baths for an essential ritual. She unfolded her camping chair on the cobbled driveway and lowered herself down into it, cradling her glass of iced tea in wrinkled hands, dark sunspots on honey skin revealing her age. This was a familiar song and dance, and we sat down next to her and waited for the fireflies to rise and begin to swoosh in a choreographed dance, their tiny glimmers electrifying the night. Then we were off. My little sister and I would run together, arms and legs overlapping with no regard for personal space, as is often the case with siblings. Her shorter stature gave her a disadvantage, so often she threw her arms on top of mine, ready to assist. My sister's skin is newly kissed golden over her arms, freckles darkening over the bridge of her nose. That new summer hue reflects the deep chocolate of her eyes that I knew to be identical to mine. My tan was nothing to comment on, gently softening my skin tone to one in a sepia photograph. Together, they created a beautiful contrast. We ran around on the uneven ground, tripping but recovering quickly as all little kids do. We'd follow the tiny lights around through the camellia and butterfly bushes, watching carefully for the next blink with our arms extended, hands cupped together. As soon as one was caught, we'd run back up the hill to our Jeannie smiling at us from the driveway, giggling as the wings tickled our small fingers. She'd be prepared with our firefly jars, canning jars with small holes poked in the top, and ready to quickly close the lid. They'd serve as our nightlight as we slept, warding off the monsters until they were released from their duties the next morning for a good day's sleep. My Jeannie thought that she was teaching us how to catch fireflies, but what she actually taught us was how to chase our dreams. Plan ahead, bring an empty container primed for the job, ready to be filled with what you gain. Every experience is improved with family along for the journey to give you a helping hand. When you lose sight, stand back and use it to regroup and reanalyze the situation. Go in with outstretched arms, reaching towards things beyond your reach. Don't be afraid to run through the prickly bushes to get where you need to be. And at the end of the day, bring what you've gained home and share it with your loved ones. This is exactly what I plan to do.
this concludes our readings, but special thanks to everyone in the class. It was really nice to hear everyone's work. Dr. Pruitt for helping us with our comic unit, and of course Dr. Revels. Round of applause for her. So anyway, thank you for this great interim.